34, Pasuk 23. I'm sorry, 438. No, hold on, my mistake. Pasuk 10, 434, Pasuk 10. What does the Torah tell us? All of a sudden we're switching gears. 434 verse 10, Pasuk Yud, all of a sudden the Torah tells us, V'sheish shanim tizra es artzecha, that for 6 years you shall plant in your land, v'asafta es tevuasa, and you should gather in its produce. V'hashvi'i, and on the 7th, the implication being the 7th year, tishmitena unitashta, right? You should not tend to the land, leave it unplanted and untended. V'achlu evyonei amecha, and the poor people, the poor among your people, should eat from the produce. V'yisram tochal chayat hasadeh, and whatever is left over from you and the poor people, the animals can eat. Kain ta'aseh lecharmecha u'lizeisecha. You don't only do this to your produce, you do this also to your vineyard and to your olive grove. Okay, so you know what we're talking about here is the mitzvah of Shemitah. Now, Shemitah is not discussed in Parshas Mishpatim, right? Shemitah is discussed by the Torah in Parshas Bahar. However, we're getting here two psukim about Shemitah. Interestingly, look at the next two psukim. Well, we will connect them together, but look at Yud Beis and Yud Gimel. What are we talking about? Sheishes yamim ta'aseh ma'asecha. Right, 6 days you have to do your work. Uvayom hashvi'i tishbos, and the 7th day you rest. Leman yanuach shorcha v'chamorecha v'yinafesh ben amascha v'hager. Okay, what are we talking about there? We're talking about Shabbos. So we actually have two psukim about Shemitah, one pasuk about Shabbos, right after all of these psukim that we've been learning about the process of Jewish jurisprudence. How you're supposed to treat the litigants who come before you. How do you treat the poor person? How do you treat the rich person? How do judges maintain their objectivity? They're not allowed to take bribes. They're not allowed to favor one side or the other. What could possibly be the connection between those things and the introduction here of the laws of Shemitah and the laws of Shabbos? But we'll start with the laws of Shemitah, the introduction with the laws of Shemitah. Why is the Torah suddenly introducing this topic? So Rav Chaim Paltiel bases himself on a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Let me get the Mishnah for you. I think we have Sidurim over here. Open up to Perek Hey of Pirkei Avos. If you open up to Perek Hey of Pirkei Avos, let's see what page this is on. It's after Shabbos Mincha davening. Okay, Perek Hey starts on page 570. Go to 574. Look at Mishnah Yud Aleph, Mishnah 11, on page 574. What does the Mishnah say? Dever ba le'olam. Pestilence, right? Dever ba le'olam, pestilence comes, it's a disease, right? Comes into the world, plague, if you will. Al misos ha'amuros batorah shelo nimseru lebezdin. When there are death penalties not carried out by the court, meaning we know that there is a prescription for capital punishment in the Torah. We have that prescription. And when a court doesn't enforce these punishments, court doesn't enforce capital punishment, what happens? So dever ba la'olam. Fascinating insight, because this is on the one hand. On the other hand, we talk about a Beis Din that executes one person in 70 years was considered a bloodthirsty Beis Din. So we have to, if we were learning Pirkei Avos, we'd have to try to figure out these two different sides of the coin. But that's not what we're interested in. Let's keep going. What does the Mishnah say? V'al peiros shvius. And also for peiros shvius. What does it mean that Dever comes to the world for peiros shvius? Who does the produce of shvius belong to?
To the Yehudim, right?
The produce of shvius belongs to everyone.
Not to the Baal Sadeh.
Nope, it belongs to the Baal of the field as well. In other words, I own a field. I own a field of apples, an apple orchard. Comes Shemitah, the year of Shemitah. I'm allowed to go into my orchard and take as many apples as I can for eating. I'm allowed to cook them. I can make apple pie. I can make applesauce. I can make apple tarts. I can do whatever I would normally do with all of those apples to feed my family. But not only can I do that, but anybody who wants to come in is able to come in and do that as well. It's open season for my apple orchard. Mm-hmm. Anybody who wants to come in from anywhere in the country can come into my apple orchard and take whatever he or she wants. Okay? As long as they're not doing commerce with it. Mm-hmm. Just like I'm not allowed to engage in commerce, they're not allowed to engage in commerce either. I'm allowed to take whatever I need to eat, and they're allowed to take whatever they need to eat.
They can't sell the apples.
They can't collect the apples and sell them, right. They can't do that, but they can take for their own needs. Mm-hmm. And the animals, are allowed to take as well, meaning basically that on Shemitah, you just unlock the gate to the orchard and leave it open.
Open season.
Whoever comes in, and that's it. Okay. After a particular point, if you have any apples left in the house, you're supposed to bring them out to the field and be mafkir them. And then once you're mafkir them, you could pick them up and bring them back into the house. But Shemitah is basically open for everybody. But let's say you don't do that. It's a Shemitah year. You double lock the gate to the apple orchard. And not only that, but you do business with those apples. So we say that's when Dever comes la'olam. Right? That's when pestilence comes into the world as a punishment from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because this produce is supposed to be for everyone. You transgress, you deprive individuals who are entitled to this produce from having it. Pestilence comes into the world. Next section of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Cherev ba la'olam. Cherev means war, if you will, comes into the world. Al inui hadin, v'al avus hadin, v'al hamorim batorah shelo kahalacha. Right, it's enough to make a rabbi run for the hills. Right. Why does war come into this world? Al inui hadin, because you use the system of justice to oppress people. We've seen how that can, right, under the context of courtroom, we see how that can happen. V'al ivus hadin means you're not judging straightly, correctly, right? Contortion, right? Crooked, right? Means something which is crooked. So crooked judgment. You're judging because somebody gave you a bribe. You're judging because you favor this individual over this individual, whatever it is. So the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos sort of connects the concept of mistreating the fruit the produce of the seventh year brings punishment from God, pestilence, and mistreating the process of justice also brings punishment from God, namely war. Why? It's interesting to think about. Why does mistreatment of the produce result in pestilence? And why does the mistreatment of justice result in war? Any thoughts? Well, who mistreats Peiros Shvius? Now we talk about, Dever Ba'ala Olam al Peiros Shvius. Who is mistreating the Peiros Shvius? The owner of the field, right? The guy who owns the apple orchard or the field of wheat or whatever it is. He's the one who's mistreating. How does he get punished? He gets punished by pestilence coming into the world. What is pestilence going to affect? It's going to affect his crops. It's going to affect his livestock. He thinks, he said, I'm going to outsmart HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
He's not
Right?
the Bible.
Right? I'm going to outsmart HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm going to keep my field locked up. I'm not going to observe the laws of Shemitah, and I'll have more as a result of that. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, sends pestilence, right? Guy loses his crops, loses his produce, loses his livestock. He winds up with much less. So we understand that Dever can indeed serve as a punishment to the person who doesn't observe the laws of Shemitah. But if justice is perverted, the people who are perverting that justice, they're in positions of authority. They are known as powerful people. How do they get punished? What has to happen for them to get punished?
They have to be toppled.
They have to be toppled. Society has to be overturned, right? They have to lose their positions of authority. How does that happen? Cherev Ba'al Olam, right? Through war, rebellion, revolution. What's going to happen? We have a Jewish community. We operate independently. We have our own system of jurisprudence. And along comes the Romans and they conquer us, engage in war with us. They conquer us, and guess what? We're no longer allowed to judge according to our laws. Now we have to judge according to the Roman laws. So whenever it is, the Mishnah is referring to this idea that punishment comes into the world almost midah keneged midah. It serves to punish the individual who is responsible for the illegal/immoral activity. So if the owner of the field is the one who is not observing Shemitah, he's the one who needs to be punished. Dever can do that. If the Dayan is perverting justice, so he's the one that needs to be punished. And milchama or cherev, right, war or the sword, can indeed do that. So the idea is, based on this Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, that these are things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings punishment into the world as a result of these things.
So you're saying a phenomenon like ISIS is just not random. They were brought into the world because we weren't doing what we needed to do.
Look, I nothing in the world is random. It doesn't mean I understand why it happened,
Yeah.
right? But everything, the minute that we ascribe something in the world to randomness,
Yeah.
no, we're denying we're denying hashgacha pratis, right? And there's nothing random in the world. Everything that happens in the world happens as part of the plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't understand it, right? Why this? Why here? Why now? But it doesn't happen randomly. So is ISIS in the world as a part of the plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? You have to say yes. Why? I don't know. I don't know.
But I don't get, if one dayan takes a bribe, why is it sort of war for the whole community?
It may not be one.
Okay, so I mean that's an interesting question, all right? You know, the examples that I gave were individualist examples. One owner perverts Shemitah. One dayan perverts justice. But the idea is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is only bringing this kind of punishment into the world, into the community, when these violations are widespread.
Tipping
And
point.
what?
They cross the tipping point.
Correct. In other words, we reach the point at which we have to say, no more, right? And it could be that everybody knows that this Dayan takes bribes and nobody does anything about it. Everybody's still a hate, right? Everybody's willing to, it's like Albany, right? Everybody's willing to look at the other direction, right? Nebuch, right? But it's that way. So when that happens, everybody has to be, removed from power.
About a year and a half ago, Rabbi Reisman lectured on war. And he asked, well, why does the Kadosh Baruch Hu bring war? Why does war occur?
And
He said, in a nutshell, he said that it's a good way to effect changes on the ground very quickly. So, for example, for hundreds of years, you had an Austro-Hungarian Empire. Then you had a war, and bingo, the
Gone.
empire is gone. We see in the Middle East now, we see gvul and boundaries set by the British.
Yes.
They were all,
right, Syria.
so
Go on.
it's a relatively, we're looking at it as a 5-year war, 7-year war, but it's a quick change. We're talking about basically Turkish occupation till now, and it's changing. So that plays a role in Hashgacha.
An interesting idea. Certainly in line with what we're saying here,
Yeah.
right?
So, what happens in Israel during Shemitah, it's probably a whole, right, books and books on it, but, how is Shemitah, implemented in Israel today? In the
How is Shemitah implemented in Israel?
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
are people allowed to sell their land and then?
Well,
they
there
sell
there is
theirs and-
there is what's called the heter mechira of the Rabbanut, which allows for the selling of land, transfer of ownership of the land to someone who's not Jewish, and once the land is owned by someone who's not Jewish, then it can be tended to. The prohibition of Shemitah, according to the heter mechira, is only on land owned by Jews in Israel, not on land owned by non-Jews in Israel. That's a whole question of, can you sell land to non-Jews? Are you allowed to do that? I mean, at one point the heter mechira was very relied on. I don't know today that it's as relied on as it was. But the heter mechira, it was the only way for the Jewish state to survive at a particular point. Today, there are many farmers who actually do observe the laws of Shemitah. And every Shemitah year, there are collections, communal worldwide collections to help support the farmers of Eretz Yisrael who are losing their crops. In other words, they're losing the potential for their crops. So, there's money which is collected to help sustain them and to support them.
So your point with Pirkei Avos was to explain the juxtaposition between the Shemitah and the things we were learning before.
Correct. That's Rav Chaim Paltiel basically says that. He says that the reason that they're juxtaposed here is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu juxtaposes them in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Right, so that juxtaposition is there. There's another approach which the Chizkuni says.
There's a time gap there.
Of course.
Scottish came first.
Of course. All right, but the idea that they are connected in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan for the world, that preceded Pirkei Avos, that preceded Chumash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan for the world. But interestingly, the Chizkuni says something different. The Chizkuni says if you look at the end of Pasuk, Yud Aleph, who is supposed to benefit from the Shemitah year? V'achlu evyonei amecha. Who benefits from the Shemitah year? The destitute, the impoverished. The same people that we've been worried about through these last few sections, right? The poor person, the person who's not going to get a fair shake in court, the person who's going to be oppressed by other people, right? That's the person, those are the people who benefit from Shemitah because they don't even own land, and now they are free to to go in and to take as much as they can eat for themselves and for their families. So that the Chizkuni puts that together. I want to do one other thing from Pirkei Avos while you have the Siddur open, page 434, just to look at a very interesting Mishnah Yud Beis. Mishnah Yud Beis says, Bi'arba'a prakim hadever misrabeh. That there are four time periods in which pestilence, which might ordinarily be in the world, right? We're not talking about a major epidemic like the previous Mishnah is talking about, but there is pestilence in the world. There are times when we are more susceptible to that pestilence. When is that? This is Mishnah 12. When is that? Baravias in the fourth year, 574. 574, Mishnah 12. Baravias in the fourth year of the Shemitah cycle. Ubashvias in the seventh year of the Shemitah cycle. Uvamotzei Shvias, and at the end of the Shemitah cycle, Uvamotzei Hachag, and at the end of Sukkot, every year. In other words, we have some that there are times that we are susceptible to an increase in this punishment of pestilence. First of all, the end of Shavuos every year. Why the end of Shavuos every year? What happens during Shavuos? We're talking Sukkot. What happens during Sukkot? Chag is Sukkot. What happens during Sukkot? We think we sit in the Sukkah. But what was Sukkot for the Jews living in Israel? Was the time of harvest. At the time of harvest, we have lots of laws that apply to the poor people. Laws such as peah, leaving over a corner of your field. Shichacha, if you forget to harvest a portion of your field. Leket, if you drop something, that you're supposed to leave it there for the poor people who would glean in the field. Back to the story of Rus in Megillas Rus. So that happens every year. And if an owner of a field is not diligent in his observance of these mitzvos, and there's a tendency not to be diligent, right? You're harvesting your field. Every little bit of the field that you harvest is going to be, extra in your checkbook. Right? Every little bit of produce that you can sell is going to make a profit for you. So I got to leave the corner of my field over here? I forgot to do that. I'm not allowed to go back. I dropped that. My workers dropped that. They're not allowed to pick it up? That's crazy. So what the Mishnah is telling us is that every year at the end of Sukkot, Kadosh Baruch Hu looks and sees how well did we observe these laws that provide for the poor people. And if we didn't observe them properly, so then there is an increase of dever in the world. Again, the same thing that we mentioned before, right? Because the dever is able to punish the people who thought they were gaining by holding their produce, by guarding it, by not distributing it properly, so they get punished by the pestilence. So that's at the end of Sukkot every year. But why year 4? Why year 7? And why at the end of year 7? So we know that there's a cycle of Trumos and Maasros, right? What's the cycle? Every year, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, every year of the cycle, the farmer has to give Truma to the Kohen. Right, the farmer has to give either 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th of his produce to you two guys.
That's all.
Right? What?
That's all.
That's all.
This field is big. It's
Right?
a lot.
1/40th, 1/50th, and 1/60th, right? And you have to compete with all the other Kohanim. It's not so easy, right? It's like trying to get that first Aliyah, right? You have to compete with all the other Kohanim who are there. Okay, so that's every year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, there is a ma'aser which is given to the Levi, a tenth of the field which is given to the Levi. That is called ma'aser rishon. Ma'aser rishon. Now, on the one hand, you could say, there's no Leviim here. You could say, hey, this isn't fair. How come the Kohanim get a 40th, a 50th, or a 60th, and the Leviim get a 10th? A 10th is a lot bigger than a 40th, 50th, or 60th. So part of the answer is, from that which the Levi received, what did he have to do? He had to give From that, he had to give a tenth of what he got to the Kohen. Right? So the Kohen got more from every Levi. Plus, the Kohen got additional things. The Kohen was entitled to portions of the sacrifices. The Kohen was entitled to the skin, right? What do they call it? The hide, right, of the sacrifices, which was very valuable, right? The Kohen could get the meal offerings, could eat the meal offerings. So there were lots of benefits of being a Kohen. Not so many benefits today, but lots of benefits in the day of the Beis Hamikdash for being a Kohen. So every year, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Truma to the Kohen, Maaser Rishon to the Levi. Now, in years 1 and 2, and in years 4 and 5, there was also something called Maaser Sheni. Maaser Rishon went to the Levi, but there was something called Maaser Sheni. Maaser Sheni was a tenth of your produce that had to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Now, okay, that's very nice. Let's say that you live, your field was in Ramot. No big deal. Pick up, I take my apples and I go to Yerushalayim and I eat them in Yerushalayim. But what about if my field is in Tzfat? Or my field's in Beersheva? What do I do? Right? I'm not going to Yerushalayim so easily. It's not a day trip for me. It's a multi-day trip or maybe a multi-week trip for me to get to Yerushalayim. So what do I do? So I'm able to redeem that fruit on money and take the money to Yerushalayim. Right? Money doesn't spoil. Take the money to Yerushalayim and use it to buy produce to eat in Yerushalayim. Why you had to come to Yerushalayim twice within the 7-year cycle has to do with the spiritual kick of Yerushalayim. That just by being in Yerushalayim, you feel charged spiritually. And from the Torah's perspective, it was inconceivable that you could live in Eretz Yisrael and not at least twice a year, twice in 7 years, go to Yerushalayim to eat the produce. There's an obligation of Aliyah L'Regel every holiday, but not everybody was able to do that. But if you were a farmer, you had to go to Yerushalayim. You had to, either you had fruit that had to be eaten or you had money that had to be spent in Yerushalayim. This was, by the way, also good for Yerushalayim. Because if you had fruit that had to be sold in Yerushalayim, right, or that had to be eaten in Yerushalayim, what would happen to Yerushalayim? The stalls in Yerushalayim would be overflowing. If there were people who were coming to, you know what happens in Yerushalayim tourist time, right? Everything's open, everything's flowing, everything's buzzing. There's a vibrancy to Yerushalayim. The Torah builds that vibrancy into Yerushalayim twice every 7 years. It also builds it in every year at the Chag, but it builds it in twice every 7 years for everybody. Okay, for every landowner. So that's why it's in year 4. Kadosh Baruch Hu sees what we did in year 3. If we didn't give properly, we get punished in year 4. Kadosh Baruch Hu sees what we did in year 6. If we didn't do it properly, we get punished. What's in year 4? What's in year 6? Year 3 and year 6. 1, 2, 4, and 5 are Maaser Sheni to be eaten in Yerushalayim. But 3 and 6 are Maaser Ani. Maaser Ani is a tenth. That tenth, Maaser Sheni, disappears in year 3 and 6. You don't have to take that tenth to Yerushalayim. What do you have to do with that tenth? You have to give it to poor people. Kadosh Baruch Hu looks and sees. The 3rd year, did you give it to poor people properly? If you did, no problem. If you didn't, what happens? Kadosh Baruch Hu sends a punishment. That's in year 4. That's right. That's why it says Bishnata Revi'it and Bishnata Shvi'it. In the 4th year and in the 7th year. And why at the end of the 7th year? At the end of the 7th year, Kadosh Baruch Hu is judging us based on what we did during the year of Shemitah. Did we leave our fields lie fallow? Did we not tend to our crops? In Shemitah, you're not allowed to tend to your crops. I have family who live in Eretz Yisrael, and on Shemitah, they let the garden go to pot. Right? You can't deal with it. You can't fertilize. You can't weed. You can't plant. You can't do any of these things.
Flowers that don't produce any fruit or anything. In some crazy way, I wonder if this is attached to, let's say, Shliach Gelt. People go to Eretz Yisrael and diaspora, people in diaspora sense. money to spend in Yerushalayim, to spend in Israel.
Well, they don't really give them money to spend in Yerushalayim. They give them money to give to tzedakah.
Right.
In other words,
So
I'm
is
making
this-
you my shaliach to do a mitzvah. Why? Because we say shliach mitzvah einan nizaki. But if I designate you as my agent to go do a mitzvah, you have a protection. Right? You have a protection that you wouldn't normally have. So therefore, I want to give you money to go to do
So
this
it's not
mitzvah.
associated.
Not connected to
Not
this.
even remotely.
No, does not appear to be connected to this. But we do have this sense that that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does look at what we do in how we treat the poor, and does punish us if we mistreat or maltreat the poor.
What happens to the poor in the other 4 years? So you go for 2 years, what about the other 4 years?
Okay, so Les asks a good question. Right, so I have a chiyuv of tzedakah. I have an obligation of tzedakah every year. I have to give tzedakah every year. But I have a special obligation of 1/10 of my field, 1/10 of my produce on the 3rd year and in the 6th year. That's on top of my tzedakah obligation. Right, so I have an obligation of tzedakah all the time. I have an obligation of tzedakah every single year. So the poor are sustained theoretically by my obligation of tzedakah. These are obligations on top of those obligations. Okay. So that's as far as explaining what this is doing here. Right? Why after all of these psukim that deal with, judging appropriately and honestly, that we're now involved with Shemitah? So according to either the Chizkuni, who says it's because if you look at the end of Pasuk 11, it says, Va'achlu evyonei amecha, that the poor people get to eat, and we're worried about the poor people. They're the ones who often get the short end of the stick. They're the ones who often get oppressed by the wealthy people, or even oppressed by the regular people. So we care a lot about the poor people. We've just spoken about how to make sure that they're judged favorably, or not favorably, but they're judged justly. So now the Torah comes along and introduces another component to dealing with the poor people, namely Shemitah. Okay. But what's very interesting is if you look at the first few words of the pasuk says, "V'sheish shanim tizra es artzecha, v'asafta es tevuasa." That 6 years you shall seed your fields, 6 years you shall plant, and gather in your produce. And in the 7th year, don't do that. The 7th year, don't plant, don't tend to the field. Allow the poor people to eat, allow the animals of the field to eat for your field, for your vineyard, and for your olive grove. Okay, your olive orchard, olive grove, I don't know, whatever. Okay, so what's the important, if I were to say to you, what's the important message of Shemitah? Is it plant the land for 6 years? Or is it don't tend to the land on the 7th year and leave it open for everybody?
Don't tend.
Correct. So if I was bringing down the essence of Shemitah here in these psukim, what do I need Pasuk Yud for? Pasuk 10 seems irrelevant. Pasuk 10 says, V'sheish shanim tizra es artzecha, v'asavta es tevuasa. 6 years you should plant, and you can gather in your produce. And then this Pasuk Yud Aleph makes sense. All right, v'hashvias, and in the 7th year, tishmetena unitashta. Just say Pasuk Yud Aleph.
Right.
If I say the 7th year you can't plant, the 7th year you can't tend, the 7th year you can't, what's that going to imply about all the other years? That you can. Why does the Torah have to tell me that?
But if you leave it fallow, then there's going to be nothing there for the 7th year for the anim.
If you
don't do anything with your land for the first 6 years, there's not going to be any crops available in the year 7.
there's not going to be any crops available, you're saying there's not going to be crops available for the poor people.
Right.
There's not going to be any crops available for you either. Right? If you don't do anything.
Do a little patch of land,
So in effect, this is a fascinating insight. The Daz Zakeni Mibalei Tosfos quotes the Medrash. I can't find the Medrash, but listen to what the Daz Zakeni Mibalei Tosfos says. He says, Itmar b'Medrash, it says in the Medrash, Da'afilu ein lo la'adam ela chorva achas besoch gano. What does he have in his garden? He's got a Nebuch garden, right? He can hardly grow anything. It's rocky, it's hilly, and one spot of the garden, that's where there's a chorva. What's a chorva?
A hole?
A ruin. It's where he can plant, and that one area, that one little tiny spot in his entire property, that's where he can grow something. Says the Medrash, chayav la'avda. He has to work that land b'chol yom, every day. Why?
It's a mitzvah to work it.
Dafka be'eretz Yisrael, kidei laharbos hafrashos trumos umasros. Why is it a mitzvah? You're chayav, not an obligation. It's an obligation to work the land. When the Torah tells us sheish shanim tizra'as artzecha, it's not giving us advice. It's not saying, by the way, if you want to eat, it'd be a good idea to plant for those 6 years.
It's a positive mitzvah.
It's telling us that you are obligated in those 6 years to plant. Why? In order to have a lot of trumos and maisros. That there is an obligation of tending to the soil in Israel in order to be mekayim the mitzvos of trumos and maisros, mitzvos hatuluyos ba'aretz. So here, it's an amazing thing. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, Zichrono Livracha, actually quotes this pasuk and this da'azakeni mibalei Tosfos in an article that was published by Shana B'Shana. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. Shana B'Shana is a publication of Heichal Shlomo. Heichal Shlomo in Israel used to be at one point the office of the chief rabbinate. I'm not sure that it still is. But they published every year this journal, this publication, Shana B'Shana. It's a little green book, but every year published it. In 1974, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik wrote an article about the mitzvah. He wrote the article about the obligation of defending the land of Israel, Bizmanenu. Milchemes mitzvah, Bizmanenu. Is there a biblical obligation of defending the land of Israel today? And in that article, he says something fascinating. I'll read it to you. If you want the article, I can email you the whole article. It's a great article. It's all in Hebrew, unfortunately, but I'll read you this part, which is very germane to what we're talking about. He says, Hamakor lichiyuv aliyah le'eretz Yisrael. The source for the obligation to live in Israel, the obligation to make aliyah, is kidei lekayem mitzvos hatuluyos ba'aretz, in order to fulfill the mitzvos hatuluyos ba'aretz. In other words, it's a mitzvah to make aliyah and to go to the land of Israel and to tend to the land and to produce fruits and other produce and to separate trumos and maisros. It's a huge mitzvah. And he says this is the source for the obligation to make aliyah. The obligation to make aliyah is to be involved in the mitzvos hatuluyos ba'aretz. He says, Shadas zekeni mibalei atosfos maskirim bekesher in pasuk shmos. Our pasuk records this Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, right, the Medrash says, Da'afilo ein lo la'adam elachor va'achas betoch gano chayev la'avda b'chol yom. Okay? It's an amazing thing. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik says that this is the source for the obligation to make aliyah, to live in Israel and to tend to the land. It's an interesting question. What if I live in Israel and I'm a software engineer? Right? What if I live in Israel and I'm a lawyer? I live in Israel, I'm an engineer. I live in Israel, I'm a social worker. Am I fulfilling the mitzvah of aliyah by doing that? Based on what Rav Aaron is saying, it depends. If you go to the store and you buy produce and then you separate trumos and maisros from that produce, so then you are fulfilling the mitzvah of the mitzvah satuliyos ba'aretz.
Okay, so mitzvahs I understand. Everybody's a Gemara here. the tzedakah, but the truma today, where did the truma go? There's no
So
truma.
Tina asks a very interesting question. By the way, just as an aside, so I was in London recently, passing through, and looking for kosher food, and guess what? It's very hard because it's not like here in America. Right here in America, you want to go see if there's kosher food. You go into the store, you look for an OU, you look for an OK, a Chaf K, a Star K. Basically, you know what to look for. In London, you have no clue what to look for. You have to have an app, and it has to tell you what who gives the
It's not on
hashgacha.
the package?
Sometimes it's on the package, sometimes not on the package. Sometimes not on the package at all. So you have to, it's not like it is here. And in many other countries of the world, there are markings on the package. Can I rely on that? Can I not rely on that? Pretty much I know if I see an OU, no matter where I am, I can rely on that. But if I see some hashgacha of who knows, can I rely on that somewhere? Anyway, in Eretz Yisrael, it's much worse. The worst hashgacha is in Eretz Yisrael because everything is so political. Everything is so political in Eretz Yisrael. Literally, if you are really careful about eating according to proper hashgacha, there are only a few places you can eat, even in Yerushalayim.
I'm talking about restaurants.
I'm talking about restaurants. I'm talking about restaurants, right? That have, and probably even hotels, that have an acceptable hashgacha.
They don't have OU there? They don't have...
No, there are products that have OU.
Yeah.
And you go to the supermarket, you can find products, American products that have OU. But if you're looking for Israeli products, you go to the hotel, right? You go to the breakfast in the hotel. Can you be sure that trumos and maisros were taken from those vegetables that are served by the hotel every morning? Right, here's these beautiful vegetable platters overflowing. Did they take trumos and maisros from those vegetable platters? You have to make sure that the hashgacha on the hotel is a good hashgacha. Because if you go into the supermarket, in other words, we go into the supermarket here, I can buy cucumbers until they come out of my ears.
Doesn't matter.
I don't have to worry. Why? Because cucumbers are intrinsically kosher. But in Eretz Yisrael, I can't just buy cucumbers. I mean, I can buy them a lot of times, 6 years I can buy them without worry about them. But the year of Shemitah, I go into the supermarket, I have to make sure that the cucumbers I buy have trumos and maisros. I'm sorry. Every year when I go into the supermarket, I have to make sure that the cucumbers I buy have trumos and maisros separated from them. That there is a valid tu'udah, a reputable tu'udah, that says trumos and maisros have been separated from these things. I go to the shuk, I go to Machane Yehuda, right? I walk through the shuk. I've done this any number of times. I walk through the shuk, there are a million different kinds of tu'udot. Do you know what you can rely on, what you can't rely on? Right, this place over here, this place, they're all selling vegetables, they're all selling cheeses, they're all selling all kinds of things.
Why cheese? Cheese you don't have.
Whatever it is, right? Whatever it is. Do we know that the hashgachos are? I'm just saying it's an issue. But trumos and maisros. So back to the question I asked. Let's say that you're an engineer and you live in Israel. So are you mekayim the mitzvah according to Rav Aaron Soloveitchik? Yes, because when you go into the supermarket and you buy your cucumbers and tomatoes and onions and you come back to your house, what do you have to do? If trumos and maisros weren't separate properly, you have to separate trumos and maisros from that. And the year of Shemitah becomes even more challenging because you can't just, Shemitah has its own, issues.
If you take 10 cucumbers home, out of the 10 cucumbers, you have to take 1/10 or out, or the farmer has to do that.
No, so when I bring cucumbers home,
Right.
okay? So I have to separate out. I have to make sure that trumos and maisros were separated out from those cucumbers.
Okay.
Now, I don't know how big the field was, right? I don't know. I'm assuming I know that trumos and maisros were not taken. I go to the average supermarket in Israel. Trumos and maisros are not taken out from their produce.
So what do you have?
Right, I go, so I have a whole thing. This is the first thing they teach American kids when they come to learn in yeshiva for a year. The first thing they teach them is how to take trumos and maisros from produce that they buy.
So does year one of the 7 years start the same for everybody? Where's the
Rosh Hashanah.
Where's the start?
Rosh Hashanah.
So let's
Rosh Hashanah is the start of every year.
stagger it. Some people can.
No. It's the same for everybody. It's the same for everybody.
So it's not Rosh Hashanah.
It's Rosh Hashanah, the same for everybody.
So I,
Just as an aside, this is you're talking about Israel. My sister lives in Haifa. She's been there since 1961. And she does not like it when I tell her that there are more kosher restaurants and Great Neck than in Haifa.
Well, that's certainly true. There's no question about that. But she's going to like you even less if you start talking to her about Trumos and Maestros, right? About taking Trumos and Maestros. So Tina asked the question, what do we do with the part that goes to the Kohen?
yeah.
I mean, you guys are Kohanim. I believe you. We all believe you. We give you that first Aliyah in Shul, right? We mention you during benching. No question that we believe you're Kohanim. Do we take a little bit of our produce and give it to you? No. Why? Because as much as we believe that you're Kohanim, we're not 100% sure that you're Kohanim. I know you tell us you're Kohanim and your fathers told you you're Kohanim and their fathers told them, but we don't know for sure. Things could have gotten mixed up over the ages. So what we do,
Israel,
what?
A Kohen in Israel.
Well, Kohen anywhere. This applies to a Kohen anywhere. So what happens? So I take the amount that I'm going to give to the Kohen. I have the whole. If you look in a siddur, now I don't think the Art Scroll siddur has it. You can look in the introduction, but other siddurim have it. They have directions for separating trumos and maestros. You take off a little piece of, you put all your cucumbers in a bag. You take up one cucumber, you cut off a little piece, you wrap it up, and you dispose of it. Right?
Even in the United States.
If you're buying Israeli cucumbers,
Israeli, I was wondering.
right? If you're buying Israeli cucumbers, that's why Everfresh sells these things called Persian cucumbers.
Yes.
Okay, they're the slender cucumbers.
Yes.
They used to call them Israeli cucumbers, but they changed the name to Persian cucumbers. Why? I mean, they're not from Israel, they're not from Iran either. But they changed the name to Persian cucumbers because people were asking, do I have to take trumos and maestros from these? Right? They're not Israeli cucumbers. I mean, for whatever reason they called them that. Okay, now they call them Persian cucumbers.
So let's say you have a Jaffa orange. What do you do?
Yeah, that could be a problem. A Jaffa orange could be a problem. Right? So you have to buy a Jaffa orange from a place that you know is reliable, that got that Jaffa orange from importers who, are careful about halacha.
And if not, then you have to take a piece of it.
It becomes very complicated, yes. But basically, you can, you take your own trumos and maestros, and if it's Shemitah, it becomes even more complicated. But we don't give it to the Kohen today. We take it and we wrap it up and we throw it out. The rest of it,
And the lady.
right, the Levi, the amount that's to be eaten in Yerushalayim, and the amount that's given to the poor people, we redeem that amount on money, on a coin, right? So I remember when I was in Israel, we used to use an agura. I don't know if they still have agurot in Israel. I think back in the day it was actually a dime. I'm not sure,
okay.
right? But the smallest coin that has a value, so you redeem the Maaser Rishon, the Maaser Sheni, and the Maaser Ani. You redeem it on this coin. And now I'm allowed to, if I redeem it on this coin, I'm allowed to eat from the produce. I'm allowed to eat
So it's
all
really
those other things.
symbolic. It doesn't, a person can't live on that. It's symbolic.
Correct. That's correct. And what happens to the coin? Well, when the coin fills up, so to speak, you redeem that coin on another coin. And ultimately, if you do this consistently, you fill up a coin, you bury the coin. Because you can't benefit from it because has a kiddush, it has kedushas damim to me. You can't benefit from it, so you do that. Okay, so these are the but according to Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, the way the Daz Zakanim Balei Tosfos understands this, Sheish Shanim Tizra Es Artzecha is not simply good advice, it's a chiyuv, it's an obligation. You live in Israel, you have to produce for 6 years. You have to plant the fields, you have to tend to the fields, and you have to grow produce so that you can take trumos and maestros.
So So in an agrarian society, this was basically how, people who didn't have.
That's how society functioned.
That's how society functioned.
Absolutely true. Okay, there's another interpretation of this, this idea of Sheish Shanim Tizra es Karmecha, Sheish Shanim Tizra es Artzecha, on the idea that none of us are really farmers. We're not so probably skilled in the art of farming. But it does seem that in the art of farming, there is a practice of allowing land to lie fallow on a regular basis, not once every 7 years, but on a more regular basis. In other words, this year I plant X in this area of land. The next year I might plant a different crop in that land, or I might not plant anything in that land. Here the Torah is coming to tell us, Sheish Shanim Tizra es Artzecha, don't worry. If you observe the laws of Shemitah properly, if you observe the laws of Trumos and Maasros properly, you don't have to allow the land to lie fallow. You plant, and I will make sure that every year is a bracha, right? A bountiful produce, right? The first way we looked at it, this is an obligation. This way we're looking at it, this is a bracha. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, this is the bracha. Plant the land. Don't worry about allowing it to lie fallow. I will bless it every year as long as you are observing the mitzvos hatuluyos ba'aretz. So that's part of the, almost part of the guarantee, which is built in here to this idea. Not just a chiyuv to work the land, but a bracha that will come about through properly observing the mitzvos. Yes.
Back to the previous question. You are an apple orchard, and I am a different one. Okay? So can't I start with my 7-year cycle this Rosh Hashanah, and you start yours next year?
Nope. It's the same 7-year cycle for everybody.
Where do you start from?
Oh, so that Les is asking a very good question.
That's the calendar.
Right? Les is asking a very good question, and that is, where did the original Shemitah start? Right? At what point in time? From day one of creation? Is that when we started counting the years, the cycle of years? This is a very debated question. It's a very debated. The answers are very common, very debated question. There are actually different opinions as to when the Yovel year is. We pretty much have agreement as to when Shemitah is. Pretty much across the board, we acknowledge when Shemitah is. But when Yovel is this Jubilee year, the 50th year. So there's major disagreements about when Yovel. I mean, we don't practice Yovel today. We don't observe Yovel today. We can talk about why another time, but we don't observe Yovel today. So we don't really have to worry about it as much. But there are tractates written on, or treatises, I should say, written on when Yovel is, how to count back, how to go back to creation and try to understand, what was the first year of creation? Is that year 0 or is that year 1? And when did it change? Right? When was Adam created? When was the world created? When was Adam created? Was Adam created in year 0 and then when Rosh Hashanah came it would switch to year 1? Was it created in year 1 and when Rosh Hashanah came it switched to year 2? Right? These are all the questions that are debated, and then go back and count the cycles. An engineer would probably enjoy it. There are mathematical calculations about how. I'll see if I can find something to share with you about how to go back and calculate the years so that we know now what year we're in. Right?
So it didn't start from Kibush Haaretz.
The obligation to us only restarted once we owned the land.
Right, so that you can trace back.
Yeah, but you needed to know what year of the cycle you were in when you, in other words,
Right.
so we captured the land, we owned the land, whatever it was, let's say 1948. Well, what year of the 7-year cycle was 1948? What year of the 50-year cycle was 1948?
You solve the whole problem by staggering this. That's what I'm saying.
HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have consulted with the engineers, right? Just it's an interesting observation, interesting question. Okay, we'll stop here for today. Yirtzeh Hashem, see you next.